Welcome back to Introduction to Engineering Design. This is Module 8.1, and we're still working on our button maker press. And today what we're going to work on is the upper die subassembly D, shown on the screen. Now this is a fairly complex mechanism. This crossbar right here, the upper die center support, sits and moves up and down somewhat on the button maker, but more importantly, the handle moves this press, the die, in and out of the different lower dies, which rotate, which you'll see when we final assemble that. So we're going to pay some attention to that. We're going to base the assembly off of part 1 here, or item 1, which is part number 401. So let's get started there. We'll make ourselves a new assembly. And we're going to start that by placing part 401. Spend a little bit of time looking at how that's oriented, just so it goes together easy in the final assembly. And what you'll notice is this roll pin is off to the back side. And my hole, which the handle rotates on, is offset below. So let's start there. So here's my piece, and I want to basically roll this around the y-axis. And now I'm going to roll it once around the x-axis. And actually I got to go around again. That's the proper orientation. Click on the green check mark and accept that. So now the next piece that I'm going to put in here is I'm actually going to start assembling from the top down on this one so I can give it a range of motion, and I'll show you why here in just a second. So let's start by putting in the shaft, which is item 4, and then we'll go with the spring and the clip. So the shaft is part number 404. And I recommend you do it one piece at a time on this one because it's fairly complicated. Go the upper die center pin. I'm going to drop that in. So to mate this, what I want to do is I want to go concentrically into the hole. I can go ahead and lock rotation, but I'm going to give it a range of motion moving up and down. And as you see from this diagram, the upper range of motion on that will be limited by this plate, which is the upper die pressure ring contacting the bottom of the upper die center support. The lower range will be limited by the spring range. We can't really simulate that real well, but we'll put the spring in and take a look at it next. So that's part number 405 and part number 402 for the snap ring and the spring. So let's insert those. Okay, a couple different things I can do with the spring. You'll notice that the spring is really a helix. It doesn't have a fully described circle. So if I go to mate this, and I just say that I want to use the center of the spring, you can say, well, I want the center of the spring, so let me pick a circle. There isn't really a circle here, is there? Because it's an arc that continuously rotates down. So instead what I want to do is I want to turn on and I want to view my temporary axes. And you'll notice that in the middle of the spring, I'm going to have, view temporary axes. I'm going to have an axis that runs through the middle of that helix. Likewise, I'm going to have an axis that runs through the middle of my shaft. So I'm going to make those two coincident. Mate that. Notice that I can't lock rotation here because the spring rotates around as I move it up and down. But nonetheless, it is located. The spring is located onto the shaft. Now to lock the rotation, what I'm going to need to do is to turn the planes on in the spring. And I'll just turn one on, turn the plane on in the shaft. And there it is. And now I want to view my planes. And I want to make these two planes so that they're coincident. that locks the spring, and it forces it to rotate with the shaft. The shaft is locked already, so it won't rotate, so the spring no longer rotates. Now for the bottom of this shaft, I don't want to mount it rigidly in here, but what I do want to do is put the snap ring on. So similarly, I've turned the plane on in the snap ring and the axis. So I'm going to mate the axis, temporary axis of the snap ring to the shaft. Zoom out and see where that went. There's my snap ring down there. And then I'm going to pull the snap ring up. Likewise, I want to lock the rotation by aligning the planes. And then I want to center it up in this slot. Now, a couple different ways you can do this. I'm going to show you an advanced mate here. And that advanced mate is called a width mate. And what I do is I select any object, two faces of the object. So in this case, the snap ring. And then I select the two faces that I want to place it in between, which are being highlighted in purple right now, which are the slot. And it will center. So you can see I can center that spring in the slot, and that kind of simulates the way that it sits. It actually will float around a little bit. So there's my snap ring in there. So now what I'm going to do is I can mate my top of my spring surface to the bottom of my snap ring. Oops, and that's a basic mate, sorry. To the bottom of my snap ring. And now you'll see my shaft. That represents the spring on the shaft. Now all that's left is for me to turn off these views. And let me get rid of my temporary axes. So now all that's left is for me to mate this particular component. So you can see I can get some motion out of it. Pretty slick. Now it kind of looks like the spring compresses as it goes down in there. It doesn't really. But you know, I'm going to leave that alone, and I'm going to leave that underdefined intentionally for now. So I've put all of those on. All that I need to do is if I actually gave this a distance or a placement relative to the fixed upper die, you'd see that this thing would resolve. And become fully resolved. I don't want to do that right now. So I'm going to get rid of that mate. I'm going to leave that underdefined. Okay, so that's my spring assembly. I haven't given it its full range of motion. I'll show you why here in just a second. So now let's put the roll pin in, which is number 3, part 403, handle retention pin. So I'm going to insert component and browse to 403. And I'm dropping that in. And we'll go ahead and mate this concentrically into the hole. Lock the rotation. And similarly, I'm going to center this widthwise. So we're going to again use that advanced mate. I'm going to use the width function. Select one end of my pin. Select the second end of my pin. Those are in blue. Center it on the center support, which highlights in purple, and accept it. So there's my width mate. So now if you look at this, what I've got is I've got my upper pin. I've got my pin into the upper center support here with the shaft, spring, and the clip on it. Next up, what I want to do is I want to put on this bottom plate, and in preparation for it, I'm going to put the screw in that actually holds the lower die to it. And it doesn't make a lot of sense here, so we got to put 3 things in at once. So let's go ahead and start with item number 7. And it's the upper die pressure ring. Insert, browse, and this is the item 407. Now to make this a lot easier, what I really want to do is rotate this around, and I'm going to rotate this so that the big pin faces up, so we're on the x-axis, and then I'm going to go ahead and rotate it once or twice around the y so that the holes face the opposite way. There you go. that'll make it so it lines up because that hole goes in there. And then I'm going to drop it. So this gets a concentric mate, and the pin of this body of the upper die pressure plate goes into the hole right here. I don't really need to lock rotation on that, and you'll see why here in just a second, because I'm going to go ahead and line up two other concentric holes here. So I'm going to line up this concentric hole and that hole to make them concentric. Again, I don't need to lock those either, but right now I haven't restricted movement of the plate up and down. Now what you'll see is that plate can't really go all the way up to the top there, but I've started the assembly of the plate. So now I'm going to put bolt 408 in, which is a small screw that drops through the top of that. So 408. See how we're doing on time here. There it is. I'm going to drop that bolt in. This bolt drops through that hole. I can lock the rotation, and the face of it is flush on the top. So there's my bolt. Now the next piece that's going to go on is going to be my upper outer ring here, part number 406. Which you'll see right there. Again, I want to do some rotation of this so that it lines up, and what I want to do is flop it over so these prongs face back. And there is a top and a bottom to this part, so we'll look at that here as we rotate it. Let's rotate it once about the x-axis, and you'll see that that is the bottom of the part. There's the top of the part, and now what I want to do is roll it around the y-axis until those prongs face aft, just like that. Drop the part in. Makes it a lot simpler. Now the way that this goes is this actually will sit on these shafts right here, and I'm going to mate those, and I'm going to go ahead and mate at least two of them. I don't need to lock the rotation, and the reason for that is I'm going to take away that axis or direction of motion here by making two concentric points line up, and you see that's the wrong one there, so I'm going to delete that one, and I'm actually going to go to this one. There too. Let me clear that. There we go. A little easier to see. We'll probably take a break here in just a second. All right. I haven't limited the range of motion of this yet either. I'm going to here in just a second. All right, so now let's start to tie some of this together. What I want to do is I want to basically mate the face here to the top there. And I can kind of start to see how this will move up and down. You can see that I'm going to give it a range limit mate. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go between these two faces, the bottom of the die support, the top of my upper pressure ring. I'm going to give it a distance, and I'm going to go from 0.25, and I'll go to advanced and make it a range. So 0.25 is the max, 0 is the min, and accept that. So now what you'll see is I have tied these together, and you'll see how it moves up and down. Kind of clever. All right, at this point, let's take a break and we'll come back for part 2.